The Secret of the Underground Room by John Bellairs, Chapter 6. The professor awoke on a hospital bed that stood in a sunny corridor of a whitewashed room. He was not wearing his glasses, so everything looked out of focus. Two shapes hovered by the bedside, and one reached out to hand him his spectacles. He put them on and saw Johnny and Fergie, who were sitting in chairs and wearing anxious frowns. After an awkward silence, Johnny spoke. How are you feeling, Professor? He asked timidly. The professor winced. Well, if you must know, he said, I feel as if someone had picked me up and slammed me against a brick wall. I'll live, though. Don't you worry about that. I'll bet you were wondering what on earth happened to me, weren't you? Fergie puckered up his mouth. Well, yeah, Prof. The hotel porter found you knocked out on the hall floor, and he figured you'd had a heart attack or something like that. What really happened? The professor pulled himself into a sitting position and calmly told them about his encounter with the creature called Dr. Rufus Masterman. So there we are, gentlemen, he said. At least now we know that we were right about Father Higgins' possession. But the big question remains, what does this demon want, and why does he need Father Higgins? I feel like someone waiting for lightning to strike, only I don't know where it will hit. The professor grew silent. Johnny noticed that a seagull had landed on the stone ledge outside the window. He watched as it ruffled its feathers and strutted pompously up and down. Finally, Fergie spoke up. We asked about Dr. Masterman today at the hotel, and the guy said that he had checked out. What do you make of that? The professor glared. What do I make of it? He snapped. We are stuck for the time being. Bristol is a big railway station with trains that go to all parts of England. All Masterman has to do is buy a ticket and vanish. He could even hop aboard one of the freighters here in the harbor. Sometimes they take passengers, or he could be living in another part of Bristol and be impossible to find. The only clues I have are those idiotic notes that were sent to Higgy. I tell you what, boys, I'll go down to the Bristol Public Library and see if I can find anything about the see if I can find anything that connects with those clues. But first, we have to move out of the Grand Hotel. It's a nice place, but it's costing a sinful amount of money. We'll find a cheaper place to stay as soon as I can get out of this hospital. That evening about sunset, the boys and the professor arrived at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Lucius O'Trigger on St. Paul Road. The house was old, 3 stories high, and made of brown sandstone. Knobbly marble ornaments decorated the windowsills, and in one window they could see a cardboard bed and breakfast sign. A brick wall with an iron gate surrounded the tiny front yard, which was full of scraggly grass and had a stone fountain with a metal cupid squatting in the middle. After the professor had paid the taxi driver, they walked up to the front door and rang the bell. The door was opened by a short, bald man in baggy tweed trousers, an unbuttoned vest, and a soiled blue shirt. As soon as he saw his visitors, he smiled and held out his hand. Good evening, he said as he ushered them in. I'm Mr. O'Trigger, and you must be the 3 folks from America. Your rooms are on the 2nd floor at the rear. Soap and towels are in the closet at the end of the hall. If you need anything, ask me or the missus. I hope you enjoy your stay here. The 2nd floor turned out to be the 3rd floor, because English people call the 1st floor the ground floor and count the next floor as the 1st. Their 3 bedrooms were very pleasant and were accessible from a small parlor, which was furnished with comfy flower-print covered armchairs and small lamps on tiny round tables. A shelf on the wall held an electric teapot with cups and saucers and a canister of tea. The swing-out windows looked across a deep valley where rows and rows of stone brick houses stood. Already the mists of evening were gathering outside, and a reddish light tinged the air. After everyone had gotten settled, the professor filled the teapot and plugged it in. Soon they were all sipping strong brown tea around the glass-topped coffee table. So what are Johnny and I supposed to do while you're plowing through stuff at the library, Prof? Asked Fergie impatiently. If I were you two, said the professor, I'd wander around and see the sights of this ancient city. There are also some interesting things to see in the towns nearby, and bus fare is cheap. Fergie and Johnny looked at each other. They both felt frustrated. They wanted to help the professor, but they knew that there was not much they could do. They would just have to wait and hope he turned up something. For 2 days, the boys wandered aimlessly around the city of Bristol. They saw the Cabot Tower, the Church of St. Mary Redcliffe, and the Clifton Suspension Bridge. They rode the big green buses that crawled up and down the steep hills of the city. Sometimes they just sat on benches and wondered what the professor was doing. On the 3rd day, they took a bus ride over to the city of Bath and looked at the Roman ruins. They caught the 8:10 bus to Bristol as they had planned. And when they got back to the main Green Line terminal, it was getting dark. Both boys felt tired and also a little depressed because the professor hadn't yet found anything in the library that would help them. When they got off the bus, the boys found the professor with a taxi waiting for them. The boys could see from the expression on the professor's face that he hadn't yet come up with anything. As a fine drizzling mist fell, the professor unlocked the door of the O'Trigger house and led the boys up the 3 flights of stairs to their rooms. Johnny felt incredibly weary, and he thought about how good his bed would feel tonight. After he'd washed up in the bathroom, Johnny went to his room and closed the door with a drowsy yawn. Then he walked over to the little window and stood looking at the yellow fog lamps that lit the streets in the valley below. Drizzle still fell, and the pavement was shiny and wet. Although Johnny was dead tired, he could feel nervousness creeping over his body. Why was he tense? He had no idea. Unfastening the window, Johnny stuck his head out and heard the hum of traffic far below. Rain blew in and wet his face, and this seemed to shake him out of his reverie. With a little laugh, he shut the window and fastened it again. Then he took off his glasses and laid them on the bedside table. With a grateful sigh, he crawled into bed and pulled the blanket over him. It was a chilly night, and he had turned on the electric fire in the tiny fireplace. Its glass rods glowed orange, and they were the last things he saw before he drifted off to sleep. A little after midnight, Johnny awoke with a start. He had no idea what had aroused him, but his reaction was sudden and swift. Quickly, he jammed his glasses onto his face. Then he jumped out of bed and padded across the floor to his suitcase, which stood on a little folding stand near the door. Digging his hand under the clothes, he pulled out the silver crucifix and chain that Father Higgins had given him years before. Under a tiny crystal bubble in the center of the crucifix were 2 splinters of wood, pieces of the true cross that Jesus died on. After slipping the chain over his head, Johnny felt safer but still edgy and on guard. But what was there to be afraid of in this homey little room in a boarding house run by 2 friendly old people? As he stood wondering, Johnny heard a sound. Scratch, scratch. It seemed like fingernails clawing at glass. With fear in his heart, Johnny looked toward the dark, rain-spattered window, and he saw a face. A long, pale face with dank, matted hair and a weepy yellow mustache and beard. It was the face of an old man with burning, hungry eyes and sunken cheeks. As Johnny watched in numb terror, the man's hands groped at the panes and his mouth opened and closed. What was he trying to say? Inside his head, Johnny heard a horrible, faint whispering, but could not understand what it said. For it seemed like a long time the nightmarish face hovered outside the window. Then the whispering faded and the sound of scratching grew faint. The face melted slowly into the rainy darkness and was gone. And that's the end of chapter 6.